Welcome back to Bills and Business, the show where we explore the intersection of policy and tech. I'm your host, Laura Davis, co-founder of USLege, and today we're joined by Gavin Nicholson. He's the founder and CEO of the TexCap Policy Institute, a nonpartisan think tank designing and advocating for private sector-guided public interest policies. Their goal is to channel private capital into long-term prosperity for all Texans through infrastructure, equitable tax structures, responsible governance, all rooted in transparency, innovation, and impact. In our conversation today, we'll explore his time inside the legislature, how bipartisanship can still work, and why private capital is such a critical part of building policy success. I think it's great that you're starting this think tank and that you have done it in such a, you want to be bipartisan, right? And how do you approach that? How do you see that? Do you get any pushback having worked for Democrats in the state? What's that journey kind of been like?
No, I mean, it's something that I have to, it's like an ongoing battle, battle, quote unquote. But I think the thing is that most people, when they talk with me at first, they don't understand that I'm a Democrat. They make assumptions based off of me. I think it's because the art of just having a conversation is lost. And most people try to insert politics in everything. But, when I was looking at what I wanted to do, I sort of looked at the areas I knew were really important, but like were not sexy. Like no one ever does the policy on. And I wanted to get a board that sort of represented the best of those worlds in a bipartisan fashion. So we're split 50-50. 50% Democrats, 50% Republicans. And we actually, in our bylaws, have a rule that says we have to have, for every Republican, there has to be a Democrat. Like it can't be separated. And so my board chairs, he's a moderate Republican. I have another board member's a Republican. I got 2 Democrats. But I think for me, it was really frustrating. And I'm sure you've had this experience too, working for Senator Paxton, was there was really good policy that just got partisan for no reason. Sure. And what was supposed to be slam dunk, everyone agrees, all of a sudden is now split 50-50, record call vote, for no reason whatsoever. And so
it is sad when that does happen, because I found leaving DC, I was so excited that state policy would be far more nonpartisan, right? Like both sides would talk about things because it's turf fights versus big headline issues. Like education funding is a nonpartisan issue, right? You would think, right? And so those types of things, I mean, we definitely, from the outside, but when I looking in, people probably would say, oh, this was a really Republican policy or this. And it was actually, this was 100% nonpartisan and agreed upon in both chambers. Literally nobody opposed it. So that's kind of, I think that's not looked at as well. And especially because of campaigns. Yeah. Right? You want to go to your audience, and when you're campaigning, they want to say, oh, I was the most Republican or the most Democratic. And really, it's a lot of, you have to work together.
And I don't know how healthy that system is in itself, because then at that point, you're not competing for the betterment of your constituents. You're competing for who can get the most policy wins. And if that's all you're competing for, there's no need to pass good policy, because it's a sort of like what happened when Nancy Pelosi passed the ACA. It's just pass it now, we'll figure it out later, which is awful way to do anything in politics. But I mean, I'm with you. And it was so frustrating, I think, sometimes, because on the staff level, you have your friends that are on both sides. Yeah. And I'd have to have conversations with them where I'm like, hey, are you guys voting this way or this way? What are you recommending? And they'd be like, oh, we're recommending against, or we're recommending for because of XYZ reason. But it always boiled down to, we always check if there's an R or D next to the name. That's the first thing. And I'm like, that's such a backwards way to do things. But I feel like that's becoming more and more prevalent as the legislature is getting more partisan. For sure. I actually got a real example of that. In the 88th legislative session, there was a bill that my boss had worked on. It was actually closing, it was funny enough, it was sort of like a full circle moment. It was closing a loophole that was accidentally created off a bill that I passed in the 87th legislature. And simple bill, just school resource officers got written out of the but the government code to get search warrants. Okay. Totally accidental. It was just the way a bill was written, kind of, carved them out. So the bill just fixed it. It just said, hey, if you are a campus police officer, you can request a search warrant. My boss, a Democrat, filed the bill, and another member, Republican, filed the bill. Exact same bill, exact same language, line by line. When it went to the House floor, he went up there, gave like a 10, 15-second spiel about it, passed 138-0. No issue. My boss went up there, the same day, by the way. My boss went up there, same bill, same everything. Not only did we have to delay the bill, we had to get multiple Republicans to speak in favor of the bill. I had to print out 151 pagers, distribute them across the House floor. And even then, it only passed like 78 to like 60.
Wow.
And it was like, at some point, like I get partisanship has to, come into play for certain core issues, but it's things like that. It's like,
wow,
okay.
that's crazy.
That
Seeing
was
the
like-
exact side by side.
Well, and I pointed that out to a lot of the offices. I was just calling them up and I was like, hey, is your boss voting for or against this? And the ones that were like, oh, we're voting against it, I'd be like, you realize you guys just voted for this exact same bill, exact same language, not even 10 minutes ago. And when I pointed that out to them, they're like, oh, we didn't realize. And I'm like, you're not doing your job then.
Oh, wow. I know. That's the thing. It's just impossible to keep up with everything. So, well, that makes sense.
There's
but
too many bills. Way too
There's
many
way
bills.
too many bills. And then I do think that that's actually a negative with AI. Like, people are going to make way more bills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's so much easier to draft a bill. now.
There's a couple states that actually limit the amount of bills you can do.
Oh, I did
And
not know that.
there's-
That's great.
We talked about that in our annual report we did. There's about 5 or 6 states. They limit the amount of bills you can do. And if you're doing
That's cool.
they'll do like a big tax bill, for instance, and that holds every single tax change in the state legislature. So rather than, how we do things where it's like 120 different, tax bills and, they get dragged out a long time. Other states, they just do it one go. You tack on like 50 amendments and it's just tax day and that's it.
Do you know which states off the top of your head?
I think Tennessee does something similar to this. I don't think they limit it artificially like that. I think Colorado does it. California has a version of it. It's not that extreme, but they do have some limits. And then I know Nevada has limits as well. So it's definitely implemented across a couple states. I hope the legislature considers it.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
I know there's a lot of things you could potentially do,
Mhm.
but who knows what will happen with all these specials.
Right.
I am interested in talking to your grandma, though, about Nevada politics
Mhm.
because I just hear it's madness.
It's crazy. She was showing me some of the during her primary. She was showing me some of the signs that people were like holding up, and they like had her like in a Photoshop like clown outfit that
Oh
was
my
like
gosh.
rhinos at the clown show or something like that. And I'm like, this woman has voted for Republicans since like the 80s. Like ever since she's been involved in politics, she's only ever worked for Republicans or voted for Republicans, and all of a sudden she's not a Republican. Makes no
A
sense.
lot of infighting right now.
On both sides, and it is, I don't know how you fix that either. I think online like social media rhetoric has a lot to do with it.
Right.
People just pick up things and it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. They think they're experts in it. It just creates more problems, I think, than people know sometimes.
And people not knowing how to have an open conversation about issues
Mhm.
because something I say all the time is nobody agrees 100% on anything ever. And so, but nobody knows now. I think probably the lockdown really didn't help because people weren't around each other.
Yeah.
The social media online rhetoric got really bad and people just started talking there more. And yeah, I definitely see that being just a huge problem. And no one wants to talk politics anymore. So, well, I love what you are doing.
Thank you.
With,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, making it more nonpartisan and talking about issues that shouldn't have a partisan lean. So tell me a little more about your personal journey. So you were chief of staff in the House for 3 sessions. But how did you get into politics? How did it all start for you?
So I was the annoying kid in government class that was super involved and active that I think people got sick of, honestly. But I knew when to shut up. So I wasn't just like arguing to argue. But I was sort of active in 2015 during those, the presidential primaries. And 2016, I volunteered for my first campaign. And then not a lot of people know this, but in 2017, I was super frustrated, which is with how the political landscape shaped out. And I decided to run for city council. And I was like 19 years old,
wow.
just starting community college. And I'll never forget. I don't think I've shared this part with anyone, but it's so funny. I went to City Hall and I go, I want to run for city council. And the city secretary looks down at me, glasses drooping. And she goes, okay, do you know what district you're in? And I was like, no, I just know I want to run. Thankfully, the district that I decided to run in had a retiring incumbent. So it wasn't like I was going to run against an incumbent.
Wow, that's crazy.
But it was a 5-person race. And I was the only candidate for 29 out of the 30 days, filing days. And I was like, am I just going to get this? It would have been crazy. But no, the last day, all 4 other people filed. And, I figured that's how it went. But that was sort of my start, and then immediately started working on a lot of campaigns and did that for a couple of years. And
Pause real quick. Did you win that race?
No.
Who beat you? 19-year-old
a guy named Scott Elliott, super nice guy. I mean, definitely deserved the seat. Definitely would have been a better option than me. But he actually won, and then he won again, re-election, and now he's retired. But I got in a 5-person race. I tried to figure out what win I could take away from it. So the win that I got was I spent the least money per capita per vote. I only got 4%, but
hey, having the balls to do it is the most important thing.
It was scary. It was I had no idea what I was doing. All I did was show up to forums too. I didn't block walk, didn't make phone calls, didn't do anything like that. I just put up road signs and went to forums. That was it. And so I was like, it's not that bad that's all I did, but it's super scary. And I still think though that if I didn't do that, I would not have gotten as far as I did in politics, because that forces you to sort of justify your beliefs. It forces you to be confronted with a lot of uncomfortable conversations of people going like, well, why do you believe in this? And as you're like a young kid, you're like, well, why do I believe in this? You know? And so I think that helped those strengthen a lot of my personal beliefs. But then in 2020, I got the opportunity to work for Rep. Carl Sherman, he represents Southern Dallas County, former Mayor DeSoto. They gave me a remote internship, and I was sort of in this position of, do I take it? Do I not? Decided to take it. I was like, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen was Winter Storm Uri, because that uplifted everything. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the session that was supposed to be focused on, the crisis of COVID, then became COVID plus Winter Storm Uri, plus all the civil unrest in the country at the time. Yeah. And so that was, I think, a hell of a session to get introduced to. And then when I left his office, I was sort of also on the side doing a lot of tech startup stuff. And
elaborate on that. What were you doing?
So I was working at a company called Opolis, and Opolis, like the Greek word for city. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that because of the emerging tech space, a lot of people were contract developers, and they were just taking on projects and things like that. Well, they didn't really get good healthcare benefits, corporate benefits, and things like that. So what we did is we basically served as an HR commons, where they could be members of our commons. They would get health insurance, group rate benefits for the same rate that you would at a large corporation without sacrificing your autonomy. And it had a co-op model. They're still around. They're doing great. But they were actually the parent company of Ethereum Denver, which is the largest Ethereum conference in North America. And so we actually got the creator of Ethereum out, all of the their teams and stuff. Kimball Musk was actually there, Jared Polis. It was all in Denver. We got Andrew Yang. I mean, it was all the tech guys, so did that. And then I got an offer from Venton Jones to join his team in June or July of 2023, I want to say, something like that. So, from there was with Rep. Jones, and we decided to leave this legislative session. So
very cool.
Quite the journey.
That was. No, I mean, that sets you up, and having the real world experience in tech and politics is, I think, going to be really helpful for you.
I think the thing that I learned and I've taken away from a lot of the tech stuff is the ability to be flexible, that I think sometimes in politics is not the most prominent. The ability to being able to say, I can get up and just do something until it's done. I think sometimes in politics where there's not really that initiative sometimes unless you really have to do something. But at least in my experience in the tech world, it's like, just get it done, because then I have more free time to do whatever the hell I want, but it definitely helped a lot.
In government, I think it does get a bad rap for having, people doing a 9 to 5, but politics, I would say, people do not sleep in that world.
That's the difference. The politics and the government, I feel like the agency people, nothing bad about agencies.
We'll cut this out, Chris.
I love agencies. But I feel like they do have the 9 to 5 for the most part when they're not in the legislative season. But then in the legislative season, that's when it's more of you got to be on call. Yeah. But, at least for me, when I was the chief, it was like a 24/7, you're always on, it was, I remember actually, I was out drinking with friends one time in Dallas. It's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. We represented the district where Fair Park is. So the state fair was going on. I'm out drinking with friends, having a good time. All of a sudden I get a news alert shooting at Fair Park. And I'm
You were there. You were.
I was
right
I was around the corner, but
Wow.
I'm like immediately thinking I have to do a press release now because that's
Yeah.
our district. So I tell my friends I'll be right back, and they didn't get it. They're like, dude, it's like Saturday. Why are you out working right now? And I'm like, you guys don't get it. Don't have time to explain. And so I'm literally in this bathroom typing up a press release and sending it back and forth to my boss, making sure it makes sense because you can't not respond to it. So
Yeah.
you have to either. My mindset was you can do it in the moment or you have to say you can't do it, but not doing something was never an option.
Yep.
You just couldn't not do it.
For sure.
So
I think it's a really good experience to become an entrepreneur as well in that space because you're always going to have something to do. And I get, there's a lot of people who don't get it. Yeah, the work stuff. And I mean, my personal life has totally changed since starting my company. I can't do as much anymore.
it's the thing on Twitter that's trending right now. It's the 996 mindset, which is you work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Which it's not healthy, but I guess there was a study or something done that showed that like all the new tech startup guys and all the tech startup founders and the developers and stuff, that's how they're living right now in Silicon Valley is 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 6 days a week.
It's 7 days a week.
7, yeah. I know. I do that. My girlfriend gets mad at me sometimes. She's like, it's the weekend, stop working.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, I gotta work though. I just have that bug. I got that itch. I don't think my ADHD helps though. That definitely causes me to fixate on stuff sometimes.
The quote, so we had our team offsite. So everyone at the company came in, which was really, really fun. And Ben, our CTO and co-founder, he did kind of a presentation, and in it, he had some funny memes and some fun quotes. And this one was Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban, work as if there's someone working 24/7 to take it all away from you.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. And honestly, everyone we hire has to be like that too.
Yeah.
And I think obviously no one's ever going to work as hard as the founder.
100%.
We totally get that. Like we're not going to expect everyone to work 7 days a week, but you have to have that hustle. Because I mean, long term, like at some point, what I'm excited about with some people in our company now, like Kush wants to start his own thing.
Yeah.
And he's going to do that, long after we get acquired, whatever happens. But wouldn't that be cool if we can then go and invest in his company?
Right.
And then he's learned so much in the startup world.
And I think that's so
Cool.
important. It passing the torch. And I think that's like something of like you and I's generation is the ability to pass the torch. Because I think, not to disrespect our elders, I think there was the people that started taking power in sort of the 80s and the 90s that had to work so hard just to get like that little bit of where they're at, that it's hard for them to let go and pass the torch and to find mentorship in the same way that they were given mentorship. I see some of the stuff on LinkedIn sometimes where it's like some guy that's clearly never, he has not been in an entry level or like started from scratch in a long time. And the advice I see him giving is like, that's not how this works today.
I love LinkedIn thought leadership. It's so fun. It's so fun to watch.
The funniest one was, I don't know if you ever saw it, there's one guy that was like, I have this idea with my friends. We're all going to get together and we're going to start a podcast, except it'll be different. There's no microphones, no cameras, and we'll talk about topics. And like the top comment was, dude, you just invented hanging out. Like that's like, but he was so serious about it too. And it's so funny. I see those all the time.
I love it so much. Are you doing LinkedIn thought leadership yet?
I hate it, but I did it with my last post because that's how the algorithm catches it. And
I'm going to go read it. Awesome.
You know who's really good at it? Is really, really good at it here in Austin is Adam Lowy.
I don't know.
So Adam Lowy is probably one of the biggest personal injury attorneys in Austin.
Oh, yes, I do know him.
So he'll do those thought leadership posts about cases he worked on, and it's the like one sentence line break. And every single time I see it, I'm like, I've already seen this case, and then I'll read this one sentence, and I'm like, okay, this is a different case. I got to read the rest of the thing now. And every single time, it's like hundreds of likes, and I'm like, clearly the algorithm is catching these somehow, some way. So I got to do it, but I hate it.
Anywho, with that, how did you go from being, in politics, entrenched as a chief, to starting about creating a think tank? I mean, this must have been brewing for a while for you.
It was, but it wasn't. I think I knew, and my boss and I both knew that, this year was probably the year that I was not going to be with his office next session. If you haven't worked in the building, it is a grueling experience. And I think sometimes, even for like the lobby that have never worked inside the building, it is so exhausting to be staff all the time.
Yeah.
And so I knew what I wanted. I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I kind of knew what I didn't want to do. And I was looking at the lobby and I was like, I could do this. I know how to not be partisan. I know how to push issues, but you don't really get to decide. It's sort of like on the, your client, things like that. So that didn't look as appealing, but I did approach a couple people about it. Looked at some agency stuff, but the like with most things in government, the salaries usually aren't the most competitive.
Sure.
And so I was sort of looking at that, sort of ruled some of that out. And really how the think tank started, because I already had a lot of crazy ideas that I wanted to push through as bills. But my boss, we had a rule where it had to be relevant to the district to file something. So we didn't get a lot of those ideas. But I knew, talking with staff and even some members, that there were some issues that there was clearly an interest, but they couldn't devote a whole bunch of time to it because it wasn't the pressing issue. And I'll never forget, I actually had one rep tell me that whenever any tech bill comes up, they don't even ask their staff to do a recommendation, because they'll just ask them, another member on the floor, how they're voting for it. And a lot of those things kept replaying in my mind as I was looking and figuring out what I wanted to do next. And one night, I went out drinking with two of my board members before they were my board members, and we were talking, and one of them just sort of frustratingly said, I think it was, he was talking about Carolyn Fairley's bill, and he didn't understand why it was being held up. He was like, this is a good bill, her cell phone ban in schools, which I love. I think it's a great bill. And I had to explain to him, look, sometimes these bills get caught up in partisan politics in a way that makes absolutely no sense to an outside observer. And he was like, well, we have access to the Capitol. Why can't we change that? Capital meaning the money. Why can't we just hire some people to go change that? And I was like, well, it's not that simple, because that requires thought leadership, that requires the ability to create research, do all these things that it's not really being done in a nonpartisan way for these more forward-looking issues. There are already some think tanks that approach things from either, the conservative side of things, the progressive left-wing side of things, and the nonpartisan ones usually focus on education, healthcare, energy, things like that. Sure. So, tech isn't really, tech, taxes, and infrastructure, things we were talking about, not really the focus a lot of time. And he goes, well, you worked in there. Why can't you do it? And I was like, wow, that's a good question. Why can't I do it? And I think from there, we started playing with the idea a bit. And I was looking around at tools, and I was like, I don't have the power of a lobby shop. Like some of these people have 8 associates and, 4 partners that have been working, and they got their spreadsheets all tracking everything. And I was looking, actually, that's how I discovered y'all, is I was like, okay, well, there's this AI tool that I actually know how to use AI responsibly, which is not just copy and paste everything it sends me.
Sure.
Oh my God, I got stories about that.
Yeah.
But looked at that and I was like, this is exactly what I need. And
cool.
So, immediately reached out, got a free trial just to see if I liked it. And I was like, this is 100% what I need, because it's better than the search engine the Texas Legislature online has, because you search a keyword and it gives you like 800 bills that all match that keyword, and it's all in numerical order. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, or they have their matching strength index, which it's like you could put in like taxes or something like that, and it'll say, well, this bill says taxes 9 times, so that means it's 100% relevant. And it's like yes and no. Right. Versus like what I like with y'all is I can say this specific taxation, policy, and I'll pull up all the bills with a bunch of different, results, and
contextual search
exactly
is really big. That's
super big. So, knowing I had all of those, I had the backing of at least 2 people and I had this tool at my fingertips. I was like, there's no reason I can't do this. I have the ability to do it. I have the knowledge to do it. I know enough people will do it. And I've had a lot of people, and I guess this is sort of the frustrating thing sometimes. A lot of people have been like, Gavin, this is so needed. We're so glad that you're doing it. And I'd be like, great, I want to get you to support, we're set up to be, a 501c3 status pending, have to say that, nonprofit think tank, would love to get you to join us. And they go, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that. I want you to be around. And I think that's sort of the taboo in the room, is if no one supports the research to do it, it never gets done, and you're going to be just as frustrated next session. So sorry, I'm yapping a lot.
No, this is
a lot.
so interesting, and thank you. I'm so happy to hear that was really helpful when you were starting your think tank. That's amazing.
If I didn't have you guys as a tool, I probably would not have started the think tank. And I'm being so serious. It made really cool sense for. I liked how easy it was. And the two things was the bill searching and also the going through committees and being able to search for keywords. Sure. Because that was so critical. Because I would remember, in my annual report, I have little quotes from senators and members. And I had one from, what was bugging me is there was a quote from Comptroller Hagar. And it was in appropriations, in the House Appropriations meeting. This is like in February or something. And I remember him saying something about the budget, but I could not remember it for the life of me. I could not remember it the day. And, the old days, you would have to go through, search every little thing.
It took hours.
And even then, it was like you may have found the part where he's at. Okay, well, now I got to go through his whole thing, which, they're questioning him for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And so y'all made it so easy.
That's amazing.
So easy.
Great. Good use case.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were going through that, you had two board members. What field were they in? They were in tech or?
So the first one is actually a venture capitalist,
cool.
And he's my board chair. He does a lot of dual use tech, so defense stuff, but also civilian application. He does a lot of energy. He spent a lot of his career in Dubai. Okay. And so he was like, there's a lot of, he's been all over the world, and he's one of those guys that's like, kind of pay attention to politics, kind of don't. He's trying to get more into it, and I guess a lot of his friends are trying to get more into it as well, because of just the landscape doesn't really make a lot of sense right now. And I think if you just get the news clips, it's like, what the hell's going on? Mm-hmm. And the other one is actually currently in politics, still very active. He's actually worked for TradePac, so there's both of them. The other two people on the flip side that do work in tech is my good buddy Joshua Lapidus. He's actually was at Lyft pre-IPO.
Cool.
And he has a bunch of stories I don't think I could tell, but
we'll have to go get drinks.
He would tell me stories about that, and then he works now on Web3 blockchain tech, and he's got he's super immersed in that world. But he worked at Consensus, which is like one of the big like Web3 companies. That's like, you think about any of the tech that's actually useful now that people use. That's not just some like random shit coin or meme coin that gets pumped on Twitter. That's the company that usually funds those projects. And now he has an accelerator that he's part of, and other things like that. And then my other board member, she's the director of government relations for a big lobby firm, and then also the executive director of the Association of Water Companies. So with all those people, I was like, we're now, anything we say, theoretically, there's some level of authority and subject matter expertise. For sure. But we're also, I run everything by my board before we publish it. So there's never like, oh, this is just Gavin. Give them, usually a week. I try, week asterisk. But to give them opportunity to review, provide feedback, change things, and things would definitely change when I send things over. But that was sort of what I wanted to do with this, is I didn't want it to be how I hear a lot of people say things are done in Texas, which is pay to play. It is the, claim to be nonpartisan, but you're not actually nonpartisan. You got some agenda, whether left or right, to push, or whether it's, you're reading a report and you're like, well, this is a really good report, only to find out, like at the very bottom in small little text, that it was paid for by the company that also has a vendor bill being, moved through the legislature right now. So all that to say, that's what really pushed me and drove me to start the think tank.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So now, what does TexCap Policy Institute do? What's your mission? What are your goals?
So our mission is the long and short of our mission is we want to drive private capital for public good. And there's a longer version of that on our website that makes more sense. But the idea is that I think there's an aversion to capital sometimes, both on the left and even some parts of the right. Money is just sort of looked at as this corrupting factor. And I think that when you actually go into it's really easy to do that when you're only in the public sector and you only see it influencing negatively.
Sure.
But I think when you actually go into the private sector and you find out there's actually a lot of people that want to do a lot of good, they just don't know how. There's not really the framework. TexCap, I believe, and I look at it as sort of that connector. So, we're able to take some of those emerging technologies, emerging policy areas. I think I don't know if you're familiar with IFP, but they are a future-based innovative think tank that does federal policy. So they only do, I think it's energy and tech policy. Those are the only two things they do. But sort of same thing. They're very nonpartisan, very, pro-build, pro-develop, pro-get everything out there. And I look at TexCap and I take on a lot of the same mantra and mindset, really, is Texas is one of the wealthiest states in the country and by extension the world. On top of that, we produce the most energy in the country, by extension the world. There's no reason we can't come together to build solutions that make sense from the nonpartisan lens, because even energy policy is starting to get partisan now. And that's scary. I was actually, before I was coming here, I was looking up some stats, but in 2023, when you look at the United States and China beat us in almost every single fuel mix except natural gas, nuclear, and oil and gas, or in oil. That's it. They beat us in everything else. So they beat us in solar, they beat us in wind, they beat us in geothermal, they beat us in all these other areas. And I think that, if you're on, depending on where you fall on the foreign policy spectrum, I don't think it matters. The idea should be that we need to make sure that we are building at the same rate and have the same capacity, especially in a state like Texas, where energy is king. I think it is very unproductive for anyone to try and curtail any energy production, whether that's oil and gas, whether that's solar. I think there actually could be an argument made for wind, now that we know it's not as efficient, now that there's more studies. But we're only able to do those studies after it's being built and we can sort of evaluate. I think sometimes that gets lost is, we make assumptions and we double down on those assumptions even after the data comes out. And one thing that I can say that I do this as best as I can is when I'm wrong, I'll say I'm wrong, I'll mess up, and I'll try to adapt accordingly. But I think that's sometimes a struggle and a lost art, especially in this space. People, they don't like saying that they're wrong.
And for those people who don't really know, what does a think tank do?
So we produce the policy research and the data for the four topics I mentioned: tax, tech, energy, natural resources, and infrastructure. So we do it from a very futuristic lens, though. So we're not going to necessarily talk about, the issue of the day that's happening in energy, like whether or not nuclear is good or bad. We take it that nuclear is good. We should build nuclear. How do we get there? And what is it going to look like in 10, 20 years? And what are the costs associated, both literally costs, but maybe the policy costs as well, of not getting us there? And so one thing that we're actually doing as an example of this is there's some research out there. It's a little experimental, but there's a company that's already doing this, and they're starting the pilot programs to turn they have the ability to turn zombie wells and old oil wells into closed loop geothermal systems.
Wow.
And it's super, super new. The main prohibitor right now is cost. The CapEx it doesn't really make a lot of sense right now. But like with anything, cost is only a temporary prohibitor. You look at computers and when they were first coming out, it was like $5-10 grand for a computer. Now you can go to Best Buy and get one for like $300.
Right.
As the technology improves, things usually get cheaper. And so we approach that things like that from it's going to come in 8-10 years. Who cares? Why not build the policy framework for it now? So when it does come, not only is it easy, but it can expand rapidly. And so with that particular one, we're still working on a white paper on it, but how do you turn the zombie wells in West Texas into these closed loop geothermal systems? They don't produce a ton of energy, but there's there's 9,000 now, 9,000 zombie wells in West Texas.
Oh, wow.
Even if you can only get 2,000 of those to produce a little bit of energy, you're adding a pretty significant amount of baseload energy to the grid. You're not going to make a ton of money off of it. But again, the idea I think sometimes when we say driving private capital for public good, that means taking a step back and saying it's okay if something doesn't make 10, 15, 20x the profit. Even if it means, hey, do we support this just a little bit so that way we can get off the ground running? I think that sometimes gets lost, and that we always look at things from dollars and cents and, what's the return now? And good things take time, I think is the the long and short of it.
A lot of our listeners are startup founders and business owners, as well as on the policy side. So I'm sure they'd be curious to know just kind of the process it took you from the idea, talking to your board members at the bar, really to, reality. So what did those months look like?
I think the main idea was it's always, what's our mission? Not like the mission vision statement, but like, what are we trying to do? And you do your SWOT analysis, like who actually exists right now? What are they doing good? What can be improved? What are the opportunities? And I think we landed on three things. We wanted to produce white papers and research. We wanted to do training for both the private sector and the public sector. One of the things I did actually as a chief is I had a lot of newer chiefs who would always come to me and ask me for advice. And I think there's not to sound, woe is me, but there's not really a training manual for how to be a chief. There's not a training manual even necessarily how to be, to work for a member. And so, you have to build those mentorship rails. And I was really thankful that I both participated in a mentorship program by another chief where I got to help other chiefs. And then I also just had friends that felt comfortable enough to come for me. I cannot tell you how many times I had my chiefs from other members, both Democrats and Republicans, come to my office, break down in tears. They were like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. My boss is frustrated. I'm frustrated. I feel so lost. Trying to balance the, making sure I'm getting my boss what he needs and the, oh my gosh, there's a person crying in my office. And, I think that seeing that, I see an opportunity to go, I don't ever want another person to have to go through what they went through or even what I went through. And that's the second thing. And then I think the third thing is also hosting events that are worthwhile. I think there's too many events in politics across too many, whether it's a think tank, whether it's a, a caucus, whether it's a whatever, is everyone gets together. You have one keynote speaker up there, maybe a panel. You get served some rubber chicken that's maybe too hot or too cold, green beans if you're lucky, and you walk away not knowing what the hell to do. There's no call to action. There's no nothing. It's everything's hunky-dory, everything's fine, just business as usual. And it's not to say things are bad, but I think complacency is the worst thing that can happen to society, because when you become complacent, you ignore real problems. And then I think sometimes when you ignore those problems, it's harder to swallow your pride. And so those are really the three things that we looked at, we sat at, and we said, these are what we want to do. These are the opportunities that we're seeing. And then it became, okay, now that's what we want to do. How do we move on them? And from there, we developed the the issue areas that we wanted to do. We figured out who we wanted to be involved. And I did some searching to figure out who I wanted on my board. And I picked who I thought I trusted enough to be nonpartisan, trusted enough to be subject matter experts, and trusted enough to actually believe in the mission, what we're doing. And I'm very thankful to have a board that's just as active as I am. So it's nice. It's a blessing, to say the least.
That's awesome. You've mentioned, ways people can have private capital for public good. Do you have any real world examples, or kind of, you said no call to action. Is there a call to action you would give to people who say, hey, I want to help. This is something that really interests me. How can I put my dollars into helping this mission? Sure.
So I think I'll give you two answers to that. So an example of how private capital can build public good. When you look at the internet, right? The internet started as mostly a government funded project, and now it is mostly owned by the private sector, right? But that's an example of, I think, a public-private partnership that works. And I'll actually give another example too. It's going to sound weird for my friends that are Democrats, but I think one thing that President Trump is getting criticized for a lot of, I think it's actually a pretty good thing, is his stake in Intel that he's taking, that 10%. I think that's great. If the public dollars fund a private service, I don't think it's a significant amount. I'm not talking little teeny, like the $100,000 grants and stuff like that people get. For the United States pouring billions of dollars into research, I don't think it's that bad if we say, hey, we'd like to see some of that back as revenue to help fund certain programs. That's not a bad thing. But it's so funny because that's an example of something where I've noticed there's a condemnation almost from, the typical, I would say there's always going to be the Democrats that anything, Trump does is just bad, just wrong, doesn't matter. I don't listen to them. There's also the Republicans that anytime the government, either proposes a new tax, either does anything that's not 100% free market, no government, bad. And at some point, I think people have to take a step back and realize that we're not funding things nearly the way that we should, both at the federal, state, at the state level. And that's driving up a lot of the costs at the local level, and why we're seeing some of those costs just skyrocket. I mean, when you look at the city of Austin, we have I think it's like a 25% tax increase or something like that. It's pretty significant. But I guarantee you a lot of those same people that are criticizing that 25% increase aren't listening to the concerns raised by the city council that are saying we're losing money from the federal level, we're losing money from the state level, and we're trying to increase our funding to accommodate the growing population. Because the idea that you can just freeze your budget and have more people move in and still have the same infrastructure doesn't make sense. But there's billions of dollars in private capital, and a lot of them want that direction on how to help people. I think that people are inherently good. I don't buy into the idea that people are inherently evil. For sure. And I think even when you look at the lobby, it's a perfect example of this. There is, I think, just this session was like $800 million spent on lobbying in Texas. Of that, only 100,000 of that was taxpayer funded. The rest of it was all private. Right. And that's an example of private capital trying to go into the public good. You can think of all the whether what side you're on, if you think this session was the worst of the worst, or if you think it was the best of the best. The issues they're normally talking about aren't about companies. It's all social, cultural issues. And, you think about how much of that 700 million of the 800 million went to those cultural issues. It's really not that much. Most of it went to the things that we don't see: the infrastructure funding, the tech funding, the water funding, and that's a big one. Those issues, they're not sexy. No one wants to hear about desalinating water, for 2 hours. Nobody wants to hear about the struggles of how do you upskill your oil and gas rig workers to fit in with the next generation of tech that's coming. They'll criticize it, and they'll say, why aren't we doing things better? But there has to be a vehicle and a mechanism to communicate those things. So
I love your outlook on lobbyists and lobbying, right? Like, I definitely think most of our customers are lobbyists. And so everyone gets a bad rap, right? Yeah. Like when I was in DC, I had someone once introduce himself and they went, "Oh, I'm an evil lobbyist." And I laughed because I was like, what? What is this reputation? But yeah, most of it is going, for the corporate kind of overall good.
And I think the difference that I say is building for these public-private partnerships. I think there's a difference between a vendor bill, which I'm not a fan of, and building frameworks for a good competitive private market. And I think sometimes those two things, it's easy to get them conflated, but I've seen vendor bills in action. Those things are awful, and you shouldn't support them. But anytime, and I think it's starting to rise now, both on the further right and among Democrats a little bit more now. But when you look at things like, I'll use jetty agreements. That was like the big thing last session. HB 5, Todd Hunter. I think there's chapter 313 and 312 agreements were expiring, and we had to get this new framework. That debate was, hours long, and I don't think they had the votes for it at first, and so it took a lot of horse trading and deal making. But I remember the criticism at the time was.
Can you share what the bill was?
HB 5.
What it did?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So HB 5 essentially it creates these I forget what they stand for, but it's basically energy and tech agreement to say, hey, if you're going to come into our community. That's fine. You have to invest this amount of money. You have to create this amount of jobs. And in return, we'll give you, these incentives, right? The thing that I heard all the time, and it's just not true, no matter what you look at, is, well, we're going to give all this money out and we're not actually going to see the return back. There is no data that I've seen that actually says that. And that's one of those things that's a feeling, right? And sometimes it's hard to put our feelings back and look at the data. Here we are 2 years later. You look at it, 160,000 jobs have been created through all of our economic development agreements. I think it's something like $200 billion in infrastructure has been invested by these companies. And there's actually been a net positive of whether it's tax revenue or revenue that the companies have given the state through these agreements of like over $2 billion. But that is an example of when you build these incentive programs that work, they can actually help people. And I think the issue is we're always so worried about, well, what about the few that are out of compliance? What if they take the money and we never get it back? We'll claw the money back then. Just because 2 people are out of compliance doesn't mean you make the other 98, lose their benefits. That doesn't make any sense. And I think there's just this fear of big capital now, big capital in the corporate space, and just because things are getting more expensive and people are looking for that enemy, I guess,
It is sad that it is demonized and money is talked about in a negative light, I would say, by many, not by everybody by any means. Was it the Center for Effective Altruism that did the research that to actually be the most altruistic and the most kind of give the most back is actually to make the most amount of money you can humanly possibly make and then use that for good.
Yeah. Right.
Like that would actually be the better thing than you, one individual, going and donating your time to help, kittens at a charity. Now, that's not a terrible thing to do. That's a great thing to do. Love that. But use of time, what if you went and spent that making huge amounts of money that you could then put back into the community and do something amazing with? That's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at, making and growing wealth and doing that is like what I can do with it is going to be so great.
And that's so crucial because I think that the thing is, and I think sometimes people lose the forest for the trees, but it doesn't really matter what issue you talk about. I think most issues can boil down to lack of funding. You think about the homelessness issue here in Austin. I mean, a lot of it has to do with lack of mental health funding. A lot of it has to do with lack of funding for these support services. I think that we all know that there used to be an analogy where it was like you could go into a room and ask people who wants to volunteer their time to help something. Everyone's hand would, maybe half of them would, raise it. And then it's, you ask the same people, all right, now the people who have their hands raised, who wants to give $5? All the hands go down. And it's at some point, whether that's through taxes, whether that's through the private capital investing, people have to understand money has to leave the pockets. Because if you just hold on to it and you just, I'll just say, if you just hoard the wealth, what's the point of having all that money if the infrastructure around you is crumbling? What's the point of having all that if nothing is being done, And I think gets lost in a lot of these conversations, especially now at the Capitol where I don't think people understand how big the numbers get sometimes. And so it's really hard to grasp. You think about $1 billion and people go, I've heard some staff say this where they're like, it's just 20 million, it's just 50 million. And I'm like, that's a lot of money,
I've heard someone call it budget dust.
That's insane to me.
Which is wild. And I'm like, what?
I've always approached it. And I think sometimes a lot of Democrats will look at me and they'll be like, okay, Gavin, you're being a little you're being funny when you say this, but I look at every dollar that the state government takes. And I think, we have to make sure that when we spend even $1, that's a better use of their money than that individual person would spend. And if it's not, then why the hell did we take that dollar? And I think that drives a lot of the sentiment too we see with taxation. I don't think people don't mind paying taxes. I think the reason they hate paying taxes is because they don't see the value and the benefits that happens when they do pay their taxes. So, now that I have my own business and my own think tank, as I'm doing my payroll, I'm looking at the taxes. I'm like, what the hell is this? This is awful.
It changes your perspective real quick on some money stuff.
But the reason I'm saying that is because I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm spending this much in taxes. That doesn't even include the health insurance. That doesn't even include the 401k. That doesn't even include these things. So what the hell is my taxes going to? Because I'm sure as hell not seeing the benefits right now, at least tangibly explained. Thankfully, I still have student loans. So thankfully, I'm seeing that with a low interest rate on my student loans. I can see that. But I think it's harder sometimes for us to grasp the benefit, which creates that sort of anti-tax sentiment, which a good example in suburban cities, you look at a McKinney or any of the DFW suburbs or Houston suburbs, you don't really hear a ton of anti-tax sentiment because the taxes are either low enough that it's affordable. It's usually from the schools, right? The schools are the ones in the suburbs that are raising taxes to account for the growth in population. But the cities, they try to keep them as low as possible. And you see the direct benefit, the return on that. You have nice infrastructure, greenery everywhere. Maybe you have a nice police system, a nice fire station just got built. You're seeing the benefits of your tax dollars built, which is why, we see these crazy bonds passed that are like $1 billion bonds in a town of like 100,000 people or something like that. I think it's harder though, when you talk about taxes, not seeing the value. So I forgot how we got on that, but
no, that makes so much sense. Because my grandma lives in Plano, and that obviously everywhere and north of that used to be farmland is now like beautiful, manicured, very affordable, beautiful homes and amenities, and that can make sense. And then if you're in maybe a part of the city that the roads are terrible, and you're like, where are my taxes going? I'm not getting the value. So I totally see.
Or MUDs. I mean, MUDs is another thing that does not get talked about. We actually highlighted this in our annual report. People love talking about schools are the biggest driver of our taxes. They're the ones that are making the largest increases. And that may be true on the dollar amount, but it's not true on the percent amount. The percent amount, the special districts have actually raised the most. And that's going to be like your MUDs, your MMDs, your TERS zones, things like that, where, again, most people don't understand. There's maybe 10,000 people in the state of Texas that understand what the hell a TERS district is. But those districts are the ones raising money. And not to get political, but I think that there does need to have a conversation about what we're doing with these MUDs, with these MMDs, with these TERS, because they are extracting value from business owners, mostly from homeowners sometimes. And there is a lot of conversations where it's not the local community like they're promised, but a company comes in and actually manages those, and then is taking all that money. And if it's a for-profit company coming in, taking in those tax dollars, they're going to approach it running that TERS district, that MMD, like any other business. How do I increase revenue? How do I increase profit while keeping my expenses low? And I don't think that's the purpose of those districts. The purpose is building infrastructure and getting infrastructure in correctly. But again, boring tax conversation. Not a lot of people want to have.
Well, jumping into another subject that's big on, what you do is AI and tech policy. So I know you just released the AI white paper.
Yep.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So going back to kind of what we were just talking about, where I'll praise people really well. I think that one thing that Governor Abbott is doing really, really well is his friendliness towards tech AI policy in general. And I think even the legislature, again, one of the last areas in our state government that's not politicized yet. So we just passed a sort of omnibus AI bill. Chairman Capriglione passed it, and it essentially creates guardrails for what both the state government and companies can and can't do. And our white paper covers a lot of, if you're a founder and you're like, you live in Texas, or maybe you're planning on deploying something in Texas and you're like, I don't have time to read every single AI policy, but I just sort of want the high level what's going on. It's perfect for you. Tells you what generally what you can and can't do. Like an example, the government can't train on biometric data, period. The law is a little more loosey-goosey when it comes to what private companies can and can't do. I'm personally on the end of, I don't think companies should be able to do that unless they get your like explicit consent.
Consent. That's it. They just need to give consent.
That's it. But right now, as far as I'm aware, a company can come in and they can train on biometric data. Easy, no questions asked, and there's nothing against the law about that. With AV policies, autonomous vehicles, we have a great framework, and it just needs to be improved a little bit. I think there was a sort of a loophole that it just happens sometimes, but you could essentially deploy an autonomous vehicle without having to let any authority know. And so that's what Tesla did as an example. They didn't let the Austin City Council know. They just deployed robotaxis, started testing them, which obviously created an uproar. And so now, as of Monday, if you launch any autonomous vehicle, you have to let TxDOT know. And then TxDOT has certain standards that they can use to revoke or grant you a license. But they actually have a map. This is a really cool thing. They have a map on their website where you can see the autonomous vehicles moving on the roads.
No way.
And you can see
it's live.
You can see the autonomous trucks moving.
Oh, that's so cool. On TxDOT's website?
It's super, super, super cool.
I'm gonna go check that out.
I think they just pull samples though, because like I only saw like 5 Waymos on the map. I'm like, there's like 500.
There's a million of them.
Yeah. There's no way there's 500. or just 5. So I think it just pulls samples, but you can see them moving on the map, and it tells you what companies they are, what their route is. And that's the other interesting thing, is they have to define an area of operation. So you can't have like a trucking company being like, yeah, we're just going to operate all over the state. You got to go point A to point B. Like there's not a we're going to go from Dallas to El Paso to Austin, Houston, back to Dallas. I don't know the intricacies of how that process works, but I just know that they do have to register. That's another example. There's a lot of stuff, and I think Texas is leading with this, and we caught this ahead of time actually last year too with deepfakes, is sexually explicit content. There's criminal penalties associated with that. We made sure that you can't have an AI model create anything with children, which is fantastic.
It's so good.
Some states are not, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional. I'm hoping it's unintentional, but they're leaving out the children aspect of it. And it's scary.
It's going to cause a lot of problems in schools with bullying.
Oh,
Think
yeah.
of that. Like, we didn't have this tech when we were in high school, and thank God. Like, it's terrible.
I thought I had it bad because Snapchat was big, and I thought like, oh my God, there's no way it could get worse. But it is like some of this stuff. I mean, I was showing my girlfriend the other day just for shits and giggles. I was like, let me show you how advanced this stuff is. Pull the video of Speaker Burrows on the dais. And it would never post it, but it's him basically going, I endorse Democrats and I'm switching parties from Republican to be a Democrat. And like all it would take is just a little bit of video editing and it would look legit, but you think about both the criminal aspect of that with like, children and stuff. I mean, it is abhorrent. Thankfully, Texas is ahead of the curve. We made it very clear. You cannot do anything with children in your AI model in Texas. And I think, though, I try not to wade into cultural issues too much, but I think one thing that does bug me a little bit is people are absolving a lot of their responsibilities as parents to the government and a lot of stuff. And I think, as an example, I know you worked on the age verification law thing.
I did.
And I had a lot of people were like, Gavin, this bill is awful. I hate it. And I was like, I don't think it's that bad, actually. It makes sense for what we're trying to do. But it can't stop there. And I think
age gate strip clubs. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
No one can go into a strip club without showing an ID.
Exactly.
Right. And this was actually the bill that I was thinking of about being nonpartisan. It was unanimously, nonpartisanly, absolutely approved.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but there's been some pushback on like freedom of speech angle. And like when you're under 18, you don't have it. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of where you don't have consent, right? This is kind of where I think there's so many parents who are super involved in doing their job as parents. But then the pushback I would give you is just there's so many parents who don't know. Yeah, right. And like you want to safeguard those kids so that it's not disproportionately affecting those who just have parents who really care and they're really involved. Not every parent is.
And I think that's the thing is there has to, and I think about when I was growing up and you might have the same experience. I felt like there was a lot of education in general about kids being online things like that. And I think something that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's because it's maybe a little bit harder to talk about organically. But when I was growing up, there was online spaces for kids, and then there was the stuff for kids that were under 10. And there's the stuff for tweens, and then there was like the adult stuff, But now there's nothing in between. It's either stuff for like toddlers, and then you're immediately thrown into the adult stuff. Like Roblox is the game that all the kids love playing. Roblox has been around since I was in like middle school. It's not a new game at all. But when I was playing Roblox as like, little middle school Gavin, it was just kids. It was meant for kids. It was meant like the graphics, everything was meant for kids.
Now you have predators on there.
Now you have predators. Now there's a very clear appeal to people with money, to people. How do we get these adults in there and play these games as well? Because they have money to spend. And I think that sometimes when you have those, you don't have those lack of spaces. There's it's kind of like what you said. There's now the only alternative is we kind of have to age gate this because we don't want kids on these websites where, especially Twitter, like it is, Twitter. It's bad.
You can get a lot of crazy stuff on Twitter. It's not really, doesn't seem censored. And going to what you said, I agree. Like when I was in high school, we had, a desktop computer. And if I was messaging someone from school or my mom was there watching me message. Like she was there for the hour that I was allowed to communicate or message someone. Like every time. She was in the room. So, and now it's just not happening.
Yep. And it's, I think it's really unfortunate too. And I don't know, I think it's symptomatic of a larger cultural thing that the United States has to figure out, because I don't think this is unique to Texas, but even think about the media that people are consuming. I was looking at a study, I forget what the name of it, but essentially it looked at what is the media that kids are consuming now. And a decade ago, there was again, those sort of gradual tiers. There was, you'd watch the, Paw Patrol at this age, then you'd maybe graduate to, like SpongeBob, and then, there'd be more the sort of young adult cartoons, and then you'd get into the adult stuff. Middle school kids now are going from using the Paw Patrol thing, like Paw Patrol to Love Island at 12.
Yeah, they should be watching
that. You're right. And I think that the thing that is sort of become the easy thing to do is use children as a defense on both sides. And it is think of the children, think of the women, think of this. And it's like, it is such a cop out to just throw people up like that, as if they're monoliths. And thinking about things in a really critical way of what are we doing and how does this actually impact people is going back again to what we're trying to do, have those really difficult, nuanced conversations in a respectful way where I think we all agree most part on what the issue is. We just might disagree on what the solution is. But I think sometimes about those debates and arguments on the floor and stuff like that, and it's the immediate accusations left and right, and it's exhausting and not productive. But anyway, so that's an example of going back to the AI policies. We also dispel a lot of myths and things like that. And one of the big ones is about data centers. Everyone loves being an expert on data centers now. Everyone loves knowing everything there is about data centers.
Thanks for teaching everyone.
And I think I know a lot of the data center guys that actually operate these data centers. And for context, there's about 5 different types of data centers. So it's not just one data center, period. In our white paper, we use the hyperscale data center, which is like, it's the behemoth. It's the stuff that like a Facebook would build. It's like usually million square feet. They consume a ton of energy. But that's the ones that are giant and use the most resources. Well, I was like, do they actually use a lot of energy? Do they actually use a lot of water? I hear, and I'm reading all these articles all the time saying they are, but are they actually? And so just like I would expect any other, person to do, I started out with my thesis, which was, I don't think they use as much water, but I do think they use a good amount of energy. Let me dive back and dive in. And so the first thing I did was I tried to find out, well, how much energy and water do these data centers use? And surprise, there's not a lot of data on the data centers. And so I found through like hours of searching this group that only does water infrastructure for data center companies. And they have this aggregated report that I don't think it's supposed to be public, but it's hosted on WordPress. And, sometimes those WordPress attachments get caught up in search filters. So I found this PDF that's talking about all this research they did, and essentially found a good starting point for what their average data center, hyperscale data center, produces in terms of energy, how power efficient are they, and the water usage. And so I basically said, all right, well, I'm going to take those because that's all I can do. That's the only publicly available data I have, and apply that to the standards that we have in Texas. The thing that I think is really interesting about that, though, is also the methodology of how data centers operate, because it's also clear people don't understand how they work. I think they assume that water comes in and it just disappears, like it never goes anywhere. The reality is most of these data centers use a closed loop system. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big gamer. I have a PC, and so I have a closed loop water cooling system in my PC too. Mm. It's the same concept, a little different on a larger scale, but it's the same concept. So when the water comes in, they recycle it. It's not like it's just getting pumped in and out.
Yeah, that's a misconception for sure. Because I've heard a lot of people argue that, like, oh, this is such a waste of water, and when it needs to just type 1 character. Mm-hmm. But yes, it does need the water, but it's looped
It's looped and
recycled.
And it's also, I think, the other sort of myth that I'll push back on is that it's always using fresh water. When you talk to a lot of the companies, it's not like they just stick a pump in the ground and they just start pumping out water.
Yeah.
They have to buy the water. And they usually buy it from these big municipal districts. And it's cheaper normally to buy dirty gray water than it is to buy fresh water. And if you are using fresh water, normally it's actually for humidity control, not cooling. A lot of people don't know this, but you can't have your servers too dry. If it's too dry, it actually creates static electricity. So you actually need a little bit of humidity in there to help dissipate some of that electricity. But going back to the numbers, the average, and I can't remember the exact water usage, but the electricity usage is insane. And I mean, it is scary.
Yeah.
Texas only has about 400 data centers, and there's only 700 hyperscale data centers in the world. I don't know how many in Texas are hyperscale, but one hyperscale data center in Texas uses 0.2% of our grid's energy. That's an issue. That is bad. That there needs to be some incentive alignment there where, and something I've thought about proposing is, we as a state will give you X amount of dollars to build your own generation for your data center. So that way you're not using the strain on the grid. The agreement that we'll do, though, is you have to sell whatever excess energy you have back to the state to pay off the loan or whatever it might be. Right? So that way, again, it's incentive alignment. Now as a data center, I have an incentive to build my own power station. I may be getting this low interest loan from the state where I can build that. The agreement is I just have to pay them back. Why would I not take that? In X amount of time, it's going to pay itself back. But I think, SB 6 by Senator Phil King, it's a fantastic bill. I think it does a lot of really good stuff. It ensures that, the long and short of it is it ensures that I think 75 megawatt or gigawatt. I'm forgetting off something. I think it's gigawatt. Those facilities, in cases of emergency, can be disconnected from the grid, which going back to 2021, seeing all of the grid strain coming up at one time. I mean, I remember it was like, hold off for a minute so we can get, just because the power's on, that does not mean start doing your laundry, turn on your dishwasher, doing all those energy intensive things. Just hold on a second. And I think it's the same kind of concept. The second thing, though, on the water, again, going back to the enumerate conversation, people don't understand how big numbers are. Texas is expected by 2030 to use 9 trillion gallons of water a year. Of that 6 trillion gallons of water a year. Of that, 51% goes to agriculture. And it's not the agriculture I think people think it is either. It's usually like alfalfa in the desert. It's, why are we growing hay in areas that have drought-like conditions? It's not it's not the data centers coming in draining water. On top of that, when you talk to any big water, even the Water Development Board or, the Association of Water Companies, whoever it might be, any person that knows water will tell you the biggest loss of water in the state is actually pipes. We lose millions of gallons to pipes every year. It's whether they're leaky, maybe they're old, but it is a real problem that, when you talk about water policy, those two things alone, would save us millions, if not potentially billions in a decade. When you look at data centers and these hyperscale data centers, they use 0.002% of water. Not even close.
That's a good argument there.
If every single data center in Texas, which they're not, was a hyperscale data center, all of them combined would only use 0.79% of Texas's water that's in use. That's not available water. That's the expected water usage. We have way more water available than that. Way more. But the thing I have to say to be careful about is just because we have all that water doesn't mean you go and build your data center wherever the hell you want, because some parts of the state have more water than others. So, North Texas and Northeast Texas, a ton of water, a lot of water. Makes more sense to build data centers there. I don't think it's responsible to build a data center in places like, San Antonio, where they're under pretty big drought conditions right now. It's residents are under, water usage warnings. And I think it can be irresponsible to build those data centers in areas like that. But again, they're not going to be the big contributors. So those two things combined, those data centers use a hell of a lot more energy than I think people understand, but so much less water than people use. And the little fun thing that I did was I found research that figured out how much water and energy use a ChatGPT query uses.
Oh yeah.
And so I scaled
That's
it.
what I've heard.
I scaled
Crazy.
it up to give an idea of how much, like one query uses, how much you would need to be the equivalent of like a shower, the equivalent of, all these things. And the long and short of it is your one query is not going to do nothing. Even if there's like 100,000 a day in Texas, it's still probably not going to do much. It's for the older, less efficient models was 7.59 milliliters for every query you send. You need like something like 500 to get to like a gallon of water, which is like, and again, that's not water that just disappears. That's the cooling usage of it.
Yep.
So this water's already circulating. It's already flowing. It's not like you're pulling it out of anywhere. There's just not, I don't think that there's really a better way to measure it right now. So that's why we have to use it like that.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
That makes me feel so much better about my
feel bad
AI
about
usage.
it.
So that's really good.
Don't feel bad about it at all.
Well, we covered a ton today.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. I've definitely learned a ton as well. So I'm excited to read more of your white papers as they come out. And do you have I know you have some events coming up. Do you want to do some plugs, share how people can
absolutely
find out about them and what you're doing?
Sure. So we're doing our launch event on October 3rd. It's
cool.
Super exciting. As far as I'm aware, it's the only event of its kind where we're taking both the public sector and a part of the private sector that I don't think has been tapped yet. There's going to be a lot of tech founders there. There's going to be a lot of venture capital folks there, private equity. But we're also, we currently have the PC chairman, Thomas Gleason's going to be there. He's talking about some of, again, the energy water usage stuff. We've confirmed Vice Chair Cassandra Garcia Hernandez. She's going to talk a little bit about federal state relations, how that money actually comes from the federal government down to the state government. We have a moderator as well, Richard Saline, who his whole thing is energy, water, infrastructure, and how do we create a more resilient future. He's going to be moderating one of the panels. And we have some guests that we're working with their schedules, trying to figure out where they can come. But, we're expecting to have a few federal lawmakers and a couple state lawmakers there as well. That's on October 3rd here in Austin. That will be from 11 a.m. to about 1:30 p.m. It's also day one of ACL, so it's a good excuse to get out of work to go to a work. You got to go to a work event, and then you can just leave our event and go to ACL.
Nice.
But tickets they're starting at pretty cheap, $25 for general admission, $125 for VIP, and I mean it's just a good time. It's not going to be like we were talking about earlier. There's events where you walk away with nothing. We're sending out an after action report talking about things that the private sector can do better to help public policymakers. What the public policymakers need to do better to help the private sector. So that'll
very
be
exciting.
Very exciting. Yeah.
I'm excited to come. And how can people find you, your website, follow you?
So if you go to texcap.org, which by the way, I'm surprised that was available. I thought TexCap, like Texas Capital, would have been taken. It wasn't. But you go to texcap.org. That is our website. That's where we host all of our research, our white papers, blog posts, interviews, whatever it might be. You sign up for our email list. I'm very careful and considerate about how many emails we send out, so I'm not blowing people up. Sure. We usually only notify people whenever we have new research, whether it's events, things like that, or you follow us on Twitter. It's TexCap Policy on all platforms, not just Twitter.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.